You know, it's strange how life can seem so stable, so completely predictable, and then out of nowhere it collapses like a cheap stack of cards. That's exactly what happened with Alex. We'd been married for 6 years, 6 whole years, in what I thought was a solid marriage. Sure, we had our arguments, and yeah, things got a bit dull at times, just like in any relationship. But if you'd asked me back then, I'd have said we were happy. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. I should have noticed the warning signs sooner, but you never expect the person who vowed to love you forever to turn into a stranger. It all began when Alex started her new job. She was excited. I'll give her that: new company, new duties, lots of opportunities, as she put it, but almost instantly her behavior changed. I remember the first time I noticed it. It was one of those minor, silly things you usually ignore. She used to text me throughout the day simple stuff like, "What are you having for lunch?" or "Don't forget to pick up milk," but then one day it just stopped. I figured she was swamped with the new job, but it didn't end there. Her schedule suddenly shifted. She was staying late at the office, attending endless business dinners and team events. At first I felt proud. She'd always been ambitious, and I thought, all right, she's just moving up. But then she started changing not just her hours, but her attitude. She became distant, as if there were this barrier between us that I couldn't break through, no matter how hard I tried. Conversations got shorter. Her laugh, the laugh I adored, became rare. And intimacy. That's where things really started to go downhill. At first I assumed she was just exhausted. I mean, a new job can be demanding. But as weeks turned into months, she was always too tired or not in the mood. I tried to be understanding, gave her space, but it was like she was drifting away, and I was powerless to stop it. I remember one night around 1 a.m. she still wasn't home. I called, but it went straight to voicemail. When she finally came in, she had some excuse about an emergency meeting that ran late. I wanted to trust her, really I did, but something didn't feel right. She wouldn't even look me in the eye when she said it. Then there was her phone. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but suddenly she always had it face down on the table or tucked away in her purse. She used to be glued to it, constantly scrolling through social media or texting. Now it was always on Do Not Disturb, and if I so much as glanced at it, she'd get defensive, snapping at me as if I were a nosy neighbor. Maybe I was just being paranoid, until I wasn't. There was one night when everything clicked. Alex had another business trip, but this time I wasn't buying it. So like a fool, I waited up, hoping she'd prove me wrong. But as the hours passed, the pit in my stomach grew. She finally came home after midnight, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, with this distant look in her eyes, like she wasn't really there. I asked her how the trip went, and she gave me this half-baked story that didn't add up. That's when I knew I had to find out what was really going on. I'm not proud of it, but yeah, I went through her phone. It took a few tries to guess her passcode, but once I was in, I wished I hadn't looked. The messages between her and that jerk Anthony were all there like a punch in the gut. They were joking around, but it wasn't just harmless work chatter. There were messages about how much they missed each other, even photos of them together close enough to make my blood boil. When she came out of the shower, I was sitting on the bed, her phone in hand. I didn't even need to say a word. I just showed her the screen. Her face went white, but she tried to play it off, saying it was a joke, that Anthony was just a friend. A friend? Friends don't send each other texts like that. I snapped back. Friends don't send messages like this, but she kept at it, insisting it was nothing, even going so far as to accuse me of invading her privacy. That's when I realized she wasn't even sorry. No guilt, no remorse, just excuses. I pushed her for the truth, and finally she came up with some sob story about how she hadn't felt connected to me, that I'd been emotionally distant. Are you kidding me? I was the one working hard to keep our life together while she was off having an affair with her supportive colleague. It's not like that, she said, looking at me with those wide eyes, the same eyes that once made me feel like the luckiest man alive. I needed to feel alive. That's all I could think, that she needed to feel alive, so she threw away everything we'd built over 6 years. I don't know what enraged me more, the fact that she cheated, or that she thought I'd be gullible enough to believe her excuses. But one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let her walk all over me and get away with it. She wanted to feel alive? Fine. I'd show her just how alive I could make her feel by taking back control. That's when I decided I wasn't going to be the pathetic, heartbroken husband. If she thought she could betray me and simply move on, she had another thing coming. I wasn't leaving her, not yet. First, I was going to make sure she regretted every single moment she spent with that bastard. So there I was, stuck in the wreckage of what used to be my marriage, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. After confronting Alex, I couldn't just sit there and let her get away with it. The thing is, after someone betrays you like that, you start seeing everything through a different lens. It's like a switch flips inside you, and for me that switch was set to revenge. I wasn't going to sit around feeling sorry for myself, absolutely not. If she wanted to go off and act like she was better than me, finding her freedom with some low-life coworker, I was going to make her feel just as low, just as miserable. That's when it hit me I had the perfect person to help with my plan: Lucy, her mother. Now, before you judge, let me explain. Lucy had always been kind to me. Even when Alex would blow up over the tiniest things, Lucy would tell me to hang in there, giving me advice and genuinely caring about me. And yes, I'd noticed how attractive she was. Sure, she was older, but she was stunning. I'd always admired her, but now in my twisted mind, she became more than just Alex's mom. She was the key to getting back at Alex. At first, it was simple. I started reaching out to Lucy more often, saying I needed someone to talk to. She was always ready to help, inviting me over for dinners, checking in on me. I played the heartbroken husband to perfection, telling her how Alex had grown distant, how I was trying to hold on but wasn't sure I could anymore. It was all true, of course, but I made myself sound like a lost, broken man in need of comfort, and Lucy lapped it up. She was so concerned, constantly asking if I was okay, offering to help however she could. And I took full advantage of that. Every time I was with her, I'd compliment her, telling her how much her support meant to me, how I didn't know what I'd do without her. I could see it in her eyes. She was eating it up, feeling like she was saving me from my misery. At first, it was innocent enough. She'd invite me over to keep me company, saying I shouldn't be alone. Initially, we'd sit in her kitchen, chatting over a couple of glasses of wine, but then the conversations grew more intense. I'd talk about how broken I felt, how I didn't know who to trust anymore, and she'd get this sad look in her eyes, as if she genuinely hurt for me. It was all too easy. One evening, while Alex was away on one of her business trips, I decided to take things further. Lucy had asked me over to help fix a leaky faucet in her kitchen. I showed up with my toolbox, but I had other intentions. After we finished the repairs, we ended up in her living room talking. I could tell she was lonely, and let's be real, she was starved for attention. I began by sitting a little closer, touching her arm as we spoke, letting my hand linger just a bit too long. She was flustered, I could see it, but she didn't pull away. That's when I knew I had her. We kept talking, and at one point I told her how beautiful she looked. She brushed it off with a laugh, but I noticed her cheeks turn pink. Then I made my move. I leaned in, not too quickly, just enough to gauge her reaction. At first she tensed up, uncertain of what was happening, but I whispered something about how grateful I was for all she'd done for me, how she was the only one who understood me. I could see her resolve crumbling right there. She was alone, I was alone. It felt like we were just two people seeking comfort in each other. When I kissed her, she didn't pull back. In fact, she kissed me back, and before long we were tearing each other's clothes off. I won't go into details, but let's just say that night I forgot all about Alex. It was just me and Lucy right there on her couch, and nothing else mattered. After that night, things escalated quickly between us. Every time Alex left on another business trip, I'd end up back at Lucy's place. She was like an addiction, something I couldn't get enough of. But let's not pretend this wasn't love or any of that romantic nonsense. For me, it was about control, about claiming something Alex would never expect. Each time I was with Lucy, I felt this twisted satisfaction, like I was finally one step ahead of Alex, making her pay without her knowing. Lucy, bless her heart, thought it was all about us finding solace in each other. She had no idea I was using her to get back at her daughter, and that made it even more satisfying. I'd spend nights with her, listening to her talk about wanting to see me happy again, saying Alex was probably just going through a phase. She didn't have a clue about Alex's affair, no idea that her sweet daughter was off with another man. The best part, Alex was completely in the dark. She'd call Lucy to check in, totally unaware that I'd just spent the night in her mother's bed. I'd listen to them talk while Lucy lay beside me, pretending everything was perfectly fine. The irony was almost too delicious. This went on for weeks. Every time Alex had a late meeting or went away for the weekend, I'd be back at Lucy's place. And I could see Lucy falling for it, falling for me. She started talking about how she wished Alex had made better choices, about how maybe we could make things work. Little did she know we were way beyond that point. After weeks of indulging in my twisted little affair with Lucy, I realized it wasn't enough. Sure, sleeping with my wife's mother behind her back felt gratifying as hell, but that was just the appetizer. I needed the main course. I wanted Alex to experience the shame and betrayal I'd felt when I discovered her and Anthony. So I started planning how to bring it all into the open. If Alex thought she could carry on with that scumbag Anthony while I played the clueless husband, she was in for a rude awakening. It was time to make her pay, and I was going to use her own mother to do it. I began with small hints, subtle, carefully placed comments at family gatherings, just enough to make people wonder but not enough to accuse me of anything. I'd casually mention how much time Lucy and I were spending together, how supportive she'd been during these rough times. At first, people nodded along, probably thinking I was just mourning my marriage. But then I'd add a little extra lingering glance, a playful touch on Lucy's arm. Innocent enough unless you looked too closely, but oh, if you did, it was like setting off a grenade. I remember one Sunday brunch at Alex's aunt's house. Everyone was there, her cousins, her friends, even a few of her colleagues. It was the perfect setting for what I had in mind. I made sure to sit right next to Lucy. We were just chatting, having a normal conversation by everyone else's standards, but I leaned in a little closer than necessary. When she laughed, I placed my hand on her knee just for a second and made sure people saw it. Her cousin Tara shot me a strange look from across the table, raising an eyebrow and murmuring something to the person beside her. That's when I knew my plan was working. The whispers began that day, and I kept fueling them bit by bit whenever I got the chance. Lucy, bless her naive heart, didn't suspect a thing. She thought we were just getting closer, and that I was finally comfortable enough to be open with her in public. She was completely unaware I was using her as a pawn in my scheme to ruin her daughter. Over the weeks, the rumors transformed into full-on gossip. Alex's friends started giving her odd looks, her coworkers were whispering behind her back, and each time she came home from one of her trips, I'd casually mention how Lucy had stopped by to check on me. "Your mom's been such a support lately," I'd say with an innocent smile. "She even stayed over last weekend when you were gone. It was nice not being alone for once." God, the look on Alex's face. She'd go rigid and defensive, probably thinking I was just being passive-aggressive, but I'd just smile sweetly, as if butter wouldn't melt in my mouth. Then the perfect storm hit. Alex returned from one of her trips, and the tension was so thick you could slice through it. She must have heard something by then because she was acting strangely, trying to probe for information without directly accusing me. But I played dumb, the picture of an oblivious husband who couldn't understand why she seemed so on edge. The breaking point came at a friend's engagement party. It was the type of event where everyone knows everyone and gossip flows freely. I made sure to arrive with Lucy by my side. Alex showed up separately, likely expecting to spend the evening mingling with friends, pretending everything in her life was perfect. But when Lucy and I walked in together, the reactions were priceless. People were whispering, pointing, nudging each other. I headed straight for Alex, acting as if nothing was amiss, as if it were perfectly normal to show up with her mother on my arm. "Hey, babe," I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Hope you don't mind. Lucy wanted to keep me company tonight." Alex's eyes widened, and for a second I thought she'd lose it right there, but she barely managed to hold herself together. She excused herself, but not before giving me a look that could have melted steel. After that, things spiraled fast. The rumors spread like wildfire, and people in Alex's social circle started pulling away from her. Her coworkers stopped inviting her to their after-work get-togethers, and I heard through the grapevine that she'd had a meltdown at the office when someone brought up me and Lucy. But the highlight came that night when Alex finally confronted me after she came home. She was shaking, either from rage or humiliation, I couldn't tell. "What the hell are you doing with my mother?" she shouted as soon as she walked through the door. I just shrugged. "She's been there for me, Alex, more than you ever were. You're disgusting," she spat, her face red with anger. "How could you?" With my mother, of all people, I just stood there letting her scream and vent. It was as if all the anger she'd bottled up was finally erupting. But here's the thing, it didn't matter. She could yell as much as she wanted, the damage was done. Her world was falling apart, and she had no one to blame but herself. Meanwhile, Lucy was a wreck. She called me in tears, asking why Alex wasn't speaking to her. I comforted her, reassuring her that Alex was just being irrational, though in truth I had achieved exactly what I wanted. Alex was humiliated, Lucy was confused, and I was the puppeteer pulling all the strings. Alex tried to salvage what she could of her reputation, but it was too late. The scandal was out there and people knew. The best part, I hadn't even lifted a finger. I was just there, watching it unfold, with a front row seat to her slow, painful breakdown. But I wasn't finished. The humiliation was only part of my plan. I wanted her to suffer, really suffer. And what better way to do that than by stripping away everything she valued: her career, her friends, her pride? That's when I knew it was time to move to the next phase. Because if she thought this was bad, she had no idea what was coming next. You'd think I would have felt satisfied after blowing up Alex's life. Sure, the look on her face when she found out about me and her mother was priceless, but it was only the start. I needed more than just scandal. I wanted to watch her life disintegrate piece by piece until there was nothing left. The affair with Lucy, that was just the opening act. Now it was time for the real fun, dismantling everything Alex had ever worked for. If she thought she could ride off into the sunset with her hotshot lover, leaving me behind, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The first step was taking a long, hard look at our finances. While Alex was off playing house with Anthony, she hadn't noticed how much control I'd quietly taken over our finances. I had access to everything: bank accounts, investments, retirement funds. It was all within reach, and Alex, so caught up in her new life, hadn't bothered to check our joint accounts in months. So I began moving money around. Nothing major at first, just small transfers here and there, enough to go unnoticed, but enough to lay the groundwork for what was coming. I opened a few accounts in my name, made some investments she didn't know about, even funneled part of our savings offshore. All the while, I kept up the act of the heartbroken husband she assumed I was. I was careful, methodical. The trick was to drain her slowly, like a parasite. I knew I had to keep her in the dark until the timing was right, and she made it so damn easy. She was too busy juggling her affair, her job, and the fallout from the public humiliation I'd set in motion. By the time Alex realized something was off, it was already too late. I remember that night vividly. She stormed into the house, her face flushed, clutching her phone as if it were a weapon. "What the hell is going on, Harry?" she yelled, waving her phone in my face. "Our accounts, there's money missing." "Did you take it?" I leaned back in my chair, giving her my most innocent look. "What are you talking about, Alex? You're the one who's been managing the finances lately, remember?" It was a complete lie, of course, but she didn't know. I'd been quietly altering our accounts, shifting funds and changing records for months, and she was too preoccupied trying to salvage her reputation after the scandal with her mother to notice. Her eyes were wild, desperate. "Don't play dumb with me. I tried paying some bills and it's gone, Harry." "Where the hell did it go?" I shrugged. "Maybe you should ask Anthony. Seems like you two have everything else under control, right?" That shut her up for a moment, the accusation hanging in the air like a knife between us. I could see her mind racing, trying to decide if I was bluffing or if she had truly lost control of everything. By the time she realized I was serious, I had already drained most of our liquid assets. The house. I'd quietly refinanced it in my name. Our joint business ventures. I'd moved my shares into a holding company she couldn't touch. Every step I took was ahead of her, and she was left struggling to catch up. I'll admit, watching her flounder as she tried to salvage the remnants of her life gave me a twisted kind of satisfaction. But I wasn't finished. She thought hiring some high-powered lawyer would be enough to bring me down. Well, I'd already anticipated that. I'd hired my own lawyer, an old college buddy who owed me a few favors, someone ruthless enough to find a loophole in a steel wall. Together, we combed through every shared account, every investment, looking for ways to drain the little she had left. Alex fought back hard, hiring an attorney who thought he was something special. But I was prepared. I had years of financial records showing her signing off on investments she didn't even remember. Hell, I even had emails between her and Anthony discussing expenses that I spun to claim she'd been embezzling from our joint accounts. She tried accusing me of fraud, but my tracks were so well covered, her lawyer couldn't find anything to stick. The court battle was brutal, but I was relentless, making sure every last detail worked against her: the affair, the rumors, even the betrayal by her own mother. I could see it wearing her down. Every court session, every lawyer meeting, she showed up looking more and more defeated. The confident, cold woman who'd told me she needed space to find herself was now just a shattered shell. I'd torn her life apart piece by piece until there was nothing left. In the end, the divorce was a bloodbath. I walked away with everything: the house, most of our investments, and a significant portion of her savings. She was left with the leftovers, barely enough to cover her legal fees. And her reputation, destroyed. Whispers followed her everywhere. Colleagues who used to laugh with her now avoided her like she was a disease. But the best part, seeing her face when the judge read the final decree. She looked pale, her eyes hollow, as if she couldn't believe how far she'd fallen. And me? I just stood there, smiling like a cat that got the cream. I had played her like a fiddle, and she hadn't realized it until it was far too late. After the ruling, Alex tried to corner me outside the courthouse. Was it worth it, Harry, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Destroying everything we built, I leaned in close so only she could hear. Worth it, sweetheart, this was just the beginning. She just stood there, tears welling up, but I felt nothing. She had broken my heart, so I destroyed her life. And as I walked away, all I could think was how satisfying it felt to see her finally face the consequences. But even then, I knew I wasn't done. There was still one last move to make, one more nail to drive into the coffin of what we once shared. It's strange how you can ruin someone's life, watch it all fall apart, and still wake up the next morning feeling, well, a little empty. I won't lie, seeing Alex reduced to nothing, walking out of that courthouse with nothing but regret and her own terrible decisions, was incredibly satisfying. But the thrill faded as quickly as it came. Once the divorce was finalized, I knew I had to leave that town. Too many memories, too many people who now knew me as the guy whose wife cheated with her colleague and got exactly what she deserved. I needed a clean slate. So I sold the house, the same one where all those lies had festered, and pocketed every last cent. It was time for a fresh start. That's how I ended up in Phoenix. Phoenix was everything my old life wasn't: new faces, new surroundings, and heat so relentless it felt like it was burning away the remnants of my past. I got a nice condo downtown, not too flashy, just enough to remind myself that I'd earned it. The best part? No one here knew my story. I could be whoever I wanted. I threw myself into work, using the connections I'd built during my marriage to Alex to secure a cushy job that paid more than I'd ever earned before. And yes, I took full control of the business ventures we'd started together. Those were mine now, I'd made sure of it. The company was thriving, and for the first time in a long while I was free to focus on myself without anyone else holding me back. But let's not pretend I was some sort of monk. I had money, freedom, and a fresh start, and I intended to make the most of it. I wasn't looking for anything serious, not after what Alex put me through. Casual flings, no strings attached, that's what I needed. And Phoenix had plenty of beautiful women, more than happy to share a drink and a night with a man who had his life together. I was more than willing to oblige. Then I met Catherine. She was different. I wasn't looking for someone like her, she just kind of stumbled into my life. We met at a networking event, you know, one of those dull gatherings where everyone pretends to care about each other's LinkedIn profiles. She was new to the city, just starting her own business. And there was this fire in her eyes that drew me in. She was confident, smart, and didn't take crap from anyone. Not like Alex, who had that desperate need for validation from every man she met. We started off casual, just drinks after work, the occasional dinner. But I won't lie, Catherine got under my skin. She was nothing like Alex. She was supportive, sure, but she wasn't afraid to call me out when I was being stubborn. I liked that. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was with someone who actually saw me for who I was, not just what I could provide for them. But even as things with Catherine got more serious, there were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting back to Alex. Not because I missed her, but because I couldn't shake the memory of the look on her face when she realized just how deeply I'd wounded her. I still remember her breaking down during that divorce hearing, trying to convince the judge I'd manipulated our finances. She thought she could outsmart me, but by that time I'd already played every card I had. Catherine, of course, didn't know any of this. She knew I'd been through a rough divorce, but I kept the details vague. What was I supposed to say? Oh, by the way, I slept with my ex-wife's mother and bankrupted her just to make her suffer. Yeah, that wasn't exactly something you'd bring up over a romantic dinner, so I kept that part of my past locked away, buried beneath the new life I was building. and for a while it worked. I was happy. I had Catherine, a thriving business, and no one in Phoenix knew a thing about who I'd been before. But now and then I'd get a text from an unknown number, always short, like "Hope you're doing well" or "Thinking of you." I knew it was Lucy. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce, but it was clear she hadn't moved on. I never answered. There was no point. Lucy was just another casualty in the war Alex started. The sad part was that she'd only ever been kind to me, but in the end she was simply collateral damage. Sometimes on those nights when Catherine was asleep next to me, I'd think about the destruction I'd left behind. I'd wonder if, just maybe, I'd gone too far. But then I'd remember Alex's face, the way she'd cried, begging me to stop the divorce proceedings and let her keep some dignity. And that's when I'd smile to myself, knowing she was getting exactly what she deserved. Catherine kept asking about my past. I could tell she was curious, trying to figure out why I seemed so closed off at times. One night, over a bottle of wine, she finally pushed just enough that I gave her a taste of the truth. I went through a nasty divorce, I told her, staring into my glass. My ex, she cheated on me, lied to me, and tried to screw me over, so I made sure she paid for it. Catherine went quiet, just watching me. I could see the questions in her eyes, the doubt, but she didn't press further. Instead, she nodded like she understood. Maybe she did, or maybe she was just willing to overlook it because she thought I was worth saving. For the first time in a while, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, maybe peace. I hadn't handled things perfectly, but who does? Life's messy, and sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to get what you deserve. But as things with Catherine grew deeper, there was always a thought nagging at the back of my mind: could I ever really leave it all behind? Could I actually let go of the man I'd become, the one who'd found satisfaction in watching Alex's life fall apart? For now, I was content to live in the present, letting Catherine believe I was just a guy who'd been hurt and was trying to start over. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was still the man who had destroyed his ex-wife's life, who had manipulated and torn apart without a second thought. And part of me wondered if there would ever be a reckoning for what I'd done. Until then, I was going to enjoy the life I'd built and the control I'd reclaimed, because in the end I'd won, and that was all that mattered. Revenge is like a drug. The high is intense, almost euphoric, but it doesn't last. I thought that taking everything from Alex would fill the emptiness she left behind, and for a while it did. But as the months in Phoenix passed, I came to realize something more disturbing than anything she'd ever done. I'd won, but I still felt hollow. Life had fallen into a rhythm. Catherine and I were closer than I'd planned. She was everything Alex wasn't: kind, carefree, genuinely interested in me for who I was, not for what I could give her. We spent weekends exploring the city, hiking mountains, and getting lost in laughter. But even though everything seemed perfect, there were nights I'd lie awake, my thoughts drifting back to all the things I'd done to get here. I kept telling myself that I'd done what needed to be done. Alex betrayed me, so I made her pay. But over time, the satisfaction I once felt soured, like a meal that tasted great at first but left me feeling sick hours later. One evening, after dinner at a little Italian spot we'd found, Catherine and I were walking back to my place when my phone buzzed. I took it out, expecting some work email or another spam text, but no, it was from Lucy. A simple message: "Hey Harry, I hope you're okay. I've been thinking about you." I froze. I hadn't heard from Lucy since the divorce, not since I'd used her to get back at Alex. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been crying in her kitchen, torn between loyalty to her daughter and whatever strange connection we'd shared. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. I didn't reply, I just left the message unread, like a reminder of everything I'd done for revenge. I kept telling myself she was just a pawn, collateral damage, but deep down I knew that wasn't entirely true. Lucy had been real to me, maybe the only genuine part of that whole mess, and I'd used her like a tool to hurt Alex. When we got back to my place, Catherine noticed something was off. She always had an uncanny way of sensing when my mind was elsewhere. She poured us some wine, sat beside me on the couch, and just waited. She knew I'd talk when I was ready. Eventually I did, though not everything. I told her about the betrayal, about Alex, about how I'd torn apart our life just to make her pay. But I left out Lucy and the full extent of my manipulation, only giving enough to paint a partial picture. Catherine just listened quietly, not interrupting. When I finished, she reached over and took my hand. "You went through hell," she said softly, "but maybe it's time to let it go, Harry. You're not that man anymore." Her words struck harder than I expected. For years I'd defined myself by the anger, the pain, the need to be in control. But here was someone who saw beyond the bitterness, beyond the revenge. But it wasn't that simple. It's not like you can just flip a switch and suddenly stop being the man who destroyed his ex-wife's life. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking back to that day in court, to Alex's face when she realized she had nothing left. I'd feel that dark satisfaction return, but now it was tinged with something else, regret, maybe. I'm still not sure. I never replied to Lucy's message, but it haunted me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd burned too many bridges, left too many casualties in my path. I'd won the battle, but at what price? Catherine was patient, though. She didn't push or demand that I reveal every dark secret. She just let me be. And slowly I began to see that maybe there was life beyond all of this, a life where I wasn't defined by my past. One night, after we'd been together for nearly a year, she asked me, "What do you want, Harry?" Really want. I didn't have an immediate answer. I'd spent so long chasing revenge, chasing that feeling of control, that I'd never really thought about what came next. But looking at Catherine, seeing the way her gaze softened when she looked at me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wanted a future where I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, where I wasn't haunted by ghosts of my past actions. The thing is, letting go is incredibly hard. It's much easier to stay angry, to keep blaming everyone else for your pain. But if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that revenge is a terrible foundation to build your life on. Sure, it feels good at first, but once the dust settles, all you're left with is emptiness. I'm not saying I'm a saint now or that I have everything figured out. Honestly, I'm still that guy who tore his ex-wife's life apart without a second thought. But I'm beginning to see that clinging to all that resentment is just a way of avoiding the real issue, that maybe I wasn't as blameless in this as I like to believe. Catherine doesn't know everything, and maybe she never will, but she sees enough to recognize the parts of me that are worth holding on to. And maybe that's enough. For the first time in a long while, I'm trying to look forward, to picture a life that isn't just about winning some small-minded game of revenge. So here I am, months down the line, still sorting things out. I don't know if I'll ever completely let go of my past, but I'm making an effort, and maybe that's all anyone can really do. I thought ruining Alex would solve everything, but it turns out the real struggle was with myself. And now I'm trying to build something genuine, something that isn't just about getting even. Because in the end, winning doesn't mean a thing if you've lost yourself along the way.